I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when someone started pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down with their bare fists. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight in Ithaca, New York, and I had just finished clearing my driveway for the second time that morning. My back ached, my fingers were still cold despite being inside for 20 minutes, and the last thing I needed was whatever chaos was about to unfold on my doorstep. I set down my mug and trudged to the door, already preparing myself for bad news. Standing on my porch was Patricia Zimmerman, the president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, wearing a puffy purple coat that made her look like an angry grape. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it was restricting blood flow to her brain. Behind her stood 2 other women I recognized from HOA meetings, both looking equally irritated and cold. "Mr. Coleman Zane," Patricia announced, as if I didn't know my own name. "We have a serious issue that requires immediate attention." "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "What can I do for you?" "The fire hydrant," she said, pointing an accusing finger toward the corner of my property. "It is buried in snow and has not been cleared. This is a violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws, which states that all homeowners must maintain clear access to fire safety equipment within or adjacent to their property boundaries." I followed her pointed finger to the bright yellow fire hydrant that was indeed mostly buried in a snowdrift. Then I looked back at Patricia with what I hoped was a patient expression, though I was already losing that battle. "That's not my property," I said simply. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," the fire hydrant. "It's not on my property. It's on the HOA common area about 3 feet past my property line." I gestured to where my yard ended. "I had the property surveyed when I bought the house 2 years ago. That strip of land belongs to the HOA. One of the women behind Patricia, a thin brunette named Sandra, whispered something in Patricia's ear. Patricia swatted her away like an annoying fly. "That is irrelevant," Patricia declared. "The hydrant is adjacent to your property, which makes it your responsibility according to our bylaws." "No, it doesn't," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "Adjacent to my property doesn't mean it's my responsibility. If the HOA owns that land, the HOA maintains it. That's how property ownership works." Patricia's face was turning an impressive shade of red. "Mr. Zane, I am telling you right now that you need to clear that hydrant by end of business today or you will be fined." "Fine me then," I said. "But I'm not clearing snow from property I don't own. If you want it cleared so badly, you can do it yourself. It's your land." "This is unacceptable," Patricia sputtered. "You are being deliberately difficult and endangering the safety of this entire neighborhood." "I'm being factual," I corrected. "And if you're so concerned about safety, maybe the HOA should hire someone to maintain the common areas properly." "That's what my HOA fees pay for, isn't it?" The third woman, whose name I couldn't remember, finally spoke up. "Patricia, maybe we should check the property maps before we proceed with any fines." Patricia whirled on her. "We don't need to check anything. He knows what his responsibilities are." "Actually, I do know what my responsibilities are," I interjected. "And clearing your property isn't one of them. Now, if you'll excuse me, my coffee is getting cold." I closed the door before Patricia could respond, though I could hear her ranting on my porch for another minute before they finally left. Through the window, I watched them trudge through the snow toward their car, Patricia gesticulating wildly while the other 2 women tried to calm her down. This wasn't my first rodeo with the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. In the 2 years since I had moved to this neighborhood on the east side of Ithaca, I had dealt with complaints about my mailbox being 2 inches too far to the left. my holiday decorations being up 3 days past the approved date, and my grass being a quarter-inch too long during one particularly rainy summer when I couldn't mow for a week. Patricia Zimmerman ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom, and she seemed to take special pleasure in targeting me after I had voted against her proposal to raise HOA fees by 30% last year. But this was different. This wasn't about nitpicky aesthetic rules. This was about her trying to make me responsible for maintaining property that I literally did not own. I pulled out my phone and called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who had handled my house purchase. He answered on the third ring. "Coleman, how's the snow treating you?" "Worse than the HOA," I said. "I need you to send me a copy of my property survey. Patricia Zimmerman is trying to tell me I'm responsible for clearing a fire hydrant that's on HOA property." Marcus laughed. "Let me guess, she's threatening fines, already threatened." "I'm sure I'll get a formal notice in the next few days. I'll email you the survey right now. That hydrant is definitely not on your property. It's on a common area strip that runs along that whole section of the neighborhood. The HOA is responsible for maintaining it." That's what I told her, but you know Patricia. Do I ever? "Listen, when you get the formal notice, forward it to me. We'll respond with the survey and relevant property law. She can't fine you for not maintaining property you don't own. It's cut and dry." "Thanks, Marcus, I appreciate it." "Anytime, and Coleman, document everything. Take photos of the hydrant, the property line, all of it. Knowing Patricia, this is going to get messy before it gets resolved." He was right, of course. I bundled back up in my winter gear and went outside with my phone, taking detailed photos of the hydrant, the snow around it, and the stakes that marked my property line. The bright orange stakes were still visible above the snow, clearly showing that the hydrant was several feet beyond my property. I even measured the distance with a tape measure and documented that too. The temperature had dropped, and fresh snow was starting to fall again. The weather forecast predicted another 6 inches overnight. I looked at the buried fire hydrant one more time and shrugged. Not my circus, not my monkeys. If the HOA wanted it cleared, they had the resources to do it. They certainly collected enough in fees from the 140 households in Meadowbrook Hills. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a formal violation notice, stating that I had failed to maintain clear access to fire safety equipment adjacent to my property, and that I was being fined $300. The letter also stated that if the hydrant was not cleared within 5 business days, I would be fined an additional $500 and would be subject to further legal action. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Marcus, along with the photos I had taken. He called me back within an hour. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said. "I'm drafting a response right now. We'll cite the property survey, the relevant statutes about property owner responsibilities, and demand they rescind the fine." "You think they will, if they have any sense, yes. If Patricia is as stubborn as I think she is, no. But legally, they don't have a leg to stand on." Marcus sent his response to the HOA the next day via certified mail and email. In it, he clearly outlined that the fire hydrant was located on HOA property, not mine, and that I had no legal responsibility to maintain it. He included copies of the property survey, photos showing the property line markers, and citations from New York property law. He demanded that the HOA rescind the fine immediately and issue a written apology. I didn't expect the apology, but I appreciated Marcus's thoroughness. For a week, I heard nothing. The snow continued to fall intermittently, and the hydrant became even more buried. I watched from my window as various neighbors walked past it without clearing it. I saw the HOA landscaping crew drive by several times without stopping to dig it out. It seemed that everyone recognized it wasn't a homeowner's responsibility. Everyone except Patricia Zimmerman. Then, on a Friday evening, I received another letter. This one informed me that my first fine had been upheld, that I now owed the additional $500 for continued non-compliance, and that the HOA was initiating legal proceedings to place a lien on my property if the fines were not paid and the hydrant was not cleared within 10 days. I called Marcus immediately, and he was furious. "They're bluffing," he said. "They have to know they'll lose if this goes to court. So what do? We call their bluff. Don't pay the fines, don't clear the hydrant, let them take it to court if they want. We'll countersue for harassment and legal fees. Coleman, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen an HOA case this straightforward. They're going to lose badly, and they're going to look like idiots doing it." "All right," I agreed. "Let's see how far Patricia wants to take this." Marcus sent another letter to the HOA, this time even more forcefully worded. He stated that any attempt to place a lien on my property would be met with immediate legal action, including a lawsuit for harassment, abuse of authority, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He also pointed out that the HOA's own landscaping company was contracted to maintain common areas, which included the strip of land where the hydrant was located. That last point seemed to hit a nerve. 2 days later, I noticed a crew from Greenscape Solutions, the HOA's landscaping company, clearing snow from various common areas around the neighborhood. They drove right past the fire hydrant without touching it. I called the company directly and asked to speak to the manager. A friendly woman named Carol answered and connected me to the owner, David Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Coleman Zane from Meadowbrook Hills," I said. "I have a question about your contract with the HOA." "Sure, what can I help you with?" "There's a fire hydrant on HOA property near my house that hasn't been cleared all winter. I'm being fined by the HOA for not clearing it, but it's on their property, not mine. Is clearing fire hydrants part of your contract with them?" There was a pause. "Can you give me the address?" I provided my address and described the location of the hydrant. "Hold on, let me pull up our contract and the property maps we work from." I could hear him typing. "Okay, yeah, that hydrant is marked on our map as being on HOA common property. We're supposed to keep all hydrants in common areas clear as part of our winter maintenance contract. So why hasn't it been cleared?" Another pause. "That's a good question. Let me check with my crews. Can I call you back?" "Sure." I gave him my number. David called back 20 minutes later, sounding annoyed. "Mr. Zane, I just spoke with my crew chief. Apparently, Patricia Zimmerman specifically instructed us not to clear that hydrant. She told us it was a homeowner's responsibility, not ours, even though it's clearly on HOA property according to our maps. She told you not to clear it." That's what my crew chief says. "She called him directly about 2 weeks ago and said to skip that hydrant. I'm looking at the email chain now. This is really inappropriate. We have a contract that specifies we maintain all fire hydrants on common property. Would you be willing to put that in writing?" "Absolutely. And I'm going to have a conversation with Miss Zimmerman about interfering with our contract obligations. If there's a fire and that hydrant isn't accessible, my company could be held liable. I don't appreciate being put in that position. I don't blame you. I'd really appreciate anything you can document about this. I'll email you the relevant parts of our contract and the communication from Miss Zimmerman within the hour." True to his word, David sent me a detailed email including the Greenscape Solutions contract with the HOA, which explicitly stated they were responsible for clearing all fire hydrants on common property. and a forwarded email from Patricia instructing them to skip the hydrant near my address, because it was the homeowner's responsibility. I forwarded everything to Marcus immediately. He called me back within minutes, and I could hear the glee in his voice. "Oh, this is perfect," Marcus said. "She deliberately prevented the contracted service from doing their job so she could fine you. This goes beyond a simple misunderstanding. This is intentional harassment. So what's our next move? We're going to request a formal HOA board meeting to address this issue. As a homeowner, you have the right to request a hearing before the board before any fines are enforced or liens are placed. We'll present all of this evidence and demand that the board overturn Patricia's decision. You think the board will side with us? If they have any sense of liability protection, yes. What Patricia did exposes the HOA to massive liability. If there had been a fire and someone got hurt because that hydrant wasn't accessible, and it came out that she deliberately prevented it from being cleared so she could fine a homeowner she has a grudge against, they'd be sued into oblivion. Marcus drafted a formal request for a board hearing, citing HOA bylaws that allowed homeowners to challenge fines and disciplinary actions. The letter was sent certified mail to all 5 board members, not just Patricia. The response came from Richard Morrison, the HOA board secretary, not Patricia. He scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks out on a Tuesday evening at the neighborhood community center. The letter was professional and neutral, which I took as a good sign. Maybe the other board members were getting wise to Patricia's vendetta. In the meantime, something interesting happened. The snow finally started to melt with a brief warm spell, and the fire hydrant became visible again. But before it fully emerged, someone cleared it. I looked out my window one morning and saw that all the snow around the hydrant had been removed, creating a clear 3-foot perimeter around it. I checked my doorbell camera footage from the night before and saw that David Brennan himself had come by with a crew at about 10 in the evening and cleared it. He had left a note tucked into my mailbox that said, "Couldn't let this continue. If Patricia has a problem with it, she can take it up with me." I appreciated the gesture, but I knew it wouldn't end there, and I was right. 2 days later, I received an email from Patricia directly, not through the formal HOA channels. The subject line was "Continued Non-Compliance," and the email was a rambling, barely coherent rant about how I thought I was above the rules, how I was endangering the neighborhood, and how she would make sure I faced the full consequences of my actions. She even went so far as to suggest that I was using my attorney to bully and intimidate the HOA board. I forwarded the email to Marcus without responding to Patricia. "Don't engage with her directly," Marcus advised. "Let her keep digging her own grave. Every email like this helps our case." The 3 weeks until the hearing crawled by. I kept documenting everything, taking photos of the now cleared hydrant, the property line markers, and anything else that seemed relevant. I also noticed that Patricia had started driving past my house multiple times a day, slowing down as if looking for other violations she could cite me for. It was unnerving, but I refused to be intimidated. I had done nothing wrong, and I had the documentation to prove it. Finally, the Tuesday of the hearing arrived. I dressed in business casual attire, gathered all my documents into a folder, and drove to the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center. The building was a modest single-story structure with a large meeting room that the HOA used for monthly gatherings. When I arrived, several other homeowners were already there, apparently drawn by the drama. Word had spread about my dispute with Patricia, and people were curious. I recognized some friendly faces and some neutral ones. A few people gave me supportive nods as I walked in. The board sat at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia was in the center, flanked by Richard Morrison, the secretary, Margaret Caldwell, the treasurer, Robert Chen, and Linda Hayes. Marcus sat next to me in the front row of chairs. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel, which seemed unnecessarily dramatic. She read through the standard opening procedures, then announced the purpose of the hearing. We are here tonight to address the continued non-compliance of homeowner Coleman Zane regarding the maintenance of fire safety equipment adjacent to his property, Patricia stated, her voice cold and formal. Mr. Zane has refused to clear a fire hydrant near his property, despite multiple notices and fines totaling $800. He is also now subject to a potential lien on his property if this matter is not resolved. Marcus stood up. Excuse me, Miss Zimmerman, but that's not an accurate characterization of the situation. May I present our case? Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but Richard leaned over and whispered something to her. She pressed her lips into a thin line and nodded curtly. You may proceed. Marcus walked to the front of the room and set up a laptop connected to a projector. He projected the property survey onto the screen on the wall, showing clearly that my property line ended several feet before the fire hydrant. As you can see from this official property survey, conducted by Miller and Associates Surveying in 2024, the fire hydrant in question is located on property owned by the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, not Mr. Zane. The property line is clearly marked, and the hydrant is 3 feet and 7 inches beyond Mr. Zane's property boundary. He clicked to the next slide, which showed photos of the property line markers and the hydrant. These photos, taken by Mr. Zane in January of this year, show the orange property line stakes that mark the boundary. As you can see, the hydrant is clearly beyond these markers. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she said nothing. Marcus continued. According to New York property law, specifically Real Property Law Section 543, property owners are only responsible for maintaining their own property, and any easements or common areas they are specifically assigned to maintain under their HOA agreement. Mr. Zane's HOA agreement contains no such assignment. The hydrant is on common property, which falls under the HOA's maintenance responsibilities. He pulled up another slide showing the relevant section of the HOA bylaws. Furthermore, according to Section 8 of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA bylaws, common areas are defined as any property owned by the HOA that is not part of individual homeowner lots. This includes easements, walkways, signage areas, and utility access points. Fire hydrants on common property clearly fall into this category. Margaret Caldwell, the treasurer, was taking notes and nodding along. Richard Morrison looked uncomfortable. Robert Chen and Linda Hayes were both studying the documents intently. Only Patricia maintained her rigid, defiant posture. Now, let's discuss the HOA's contract with Greenscape Solutions, Marcus said, pulling up the next slide. This is the winter maintenance contract signed by Ms. Zimmerman on behalf of the HOA. Section 3. Subsection B clearly states that Greenscape Solutions is responsible for clearing all fire hydrants located on HOA common property. He zoomed in on the relevant text, highlighting it in yellow. This means that the HOA already pays a contractor to maintain this fire hydrant. It is literally already being paid for out of HOA fees. Mr. Zane is paying his share of the costs to maintain this hydrant through his HOA fees, and yet he is being fined for not maintaining it personally. Patricia finally spoke up. The contractor failed to maintain it properly, so the adjacent homeowner should take responsibility. Marcus smiled, and I knew he had been waiting for this. Actually, Miss Zimmerman, the contractor did not fail to maintain it. You instructed them not to maintain it. He pulled up the email from Patricia to Greenscape Solutions. This is an email dated January 14th of this year from you, Miss Zimmerman, to the crew chief at Greenscape Solutions, specifically instructing them to skip the fire hydrant near Mr. Zane's property because it was, and I quote, the homeowner's responsibility. You deliberately prevented the contracted service from doing their job so that you could fine Mr. Zane for not doing a job that was never his to begin with. The room erupted in murmurs. Several homeowners in the audience gasped. The other 4 board members all turned to stare at Patricia, who had gone pale. That's a mischaracterization, Patricia stammered. I was simply clarifying responsibilities. You were interfering with a contract in order to create a violation where none existed, Marcus countered. And in doing so, you endangered the safety of this entire neighborhood. If there had been a fire during the weeks that hydrant was inaccessible because you prevented it from being cleared, the HOA would have been liable. Homeowners could have been injured or killed. Property could have been destroyed, and it would have been because you were pursuing a personal vendetta against Mr. Zane. Richard Morrison stood up. Patricia, is this true? Did you tell Greenscape not to clear that hydrant? Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I don't appreciate being ambushed like this. It's not an ambush, Richard said, his voice hard. Did you or did you not instruct our contractor to skip that hydrant? I made a judgment call based on my interpretation of the bylaws, Patricia said defensively. Your interpretation was wrong, Marcus interjected. And you were told it was wrong repeatedly with documentation, and you chose to double down instead of admitting your mistake. You escalated fines, threatened a lien, and put homeowners at risk. Margaret spoke up. I'd like to make a motion to overturn all fines against Mr. Zane and issue a formal apology. I second that motion, Linda Hayes said immediately. Patricia looked betrayed. You can't just railroad me like this. We're not railroading you, Robert Chen said quietly. We're correcting a serious error in judgment. This should never have gotten this far. Richard called for a vote. All 4 board members besides Patricia voted to overturn the fines and issue a formal apology. Patricia abstained, her face red with anger and embarrassment. Furthermore, Richard continued, I'm calling for an emergency executive session of the board to discuss Miss Zimmerman's conduct and whether she should continue as president. You can't remove me, Patricia said. I was elected by the homeowners. We can censure you and recommend a recall election, Margaret said. And given what I've seen tonight, that's exactly what I'm going to recommend. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Patricia stormed out, nearly knocking over a chair on her way to the exit. The other board members huddled together in discussion while homeowners in the audience talked among themselves. Several people came up to me to offer support and apologize for what I had been put through. Marcus packed up his laptop, looking satisfied. Well, that went about as well as I could have hoped. You think they'll actually remove her as president? I asked. I think she'll be lucky if that's all that happens. If the other board members are smart, they'll distance themselves from her as fast as possible. What she did was incredibly reckless. We left the community center, and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The fines were overturned, and Patricia had been exposed for her petty vindictiveness. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days after the hearing, I received a notice that Patricia had resigned as HOA president. Richard Morrison had been appointed interim president until a proper election could be held. The notice also included a formal apology for the misunderstanding regarding the fire hydrant and confirmed that all fines had been rescinded. I thought Patricia would slink away quietly after her humiliation, but I should have known better. A week later, I came home from work to find my mailbox had been knocked over. The post had been snapped at the base, and the mailbox itself was dented, lying in the snow at the end of my driveway. I checked my doorbell camera and saw that a car had deliberately swerved to hit it around 3 in the afternoon. The license plate was partially visible. I called the police and filed a report. The responding officer, a tired-looking woman named Officer Santos, took photos and noted the license plate number I had captured. I can run this plate, but if the driver claims it was an accident, there's not much we can do, she said. Mailbox vandalism is pretty common, unfortunately. Even when it's clearly deliberate on video. Officer Santos reviewed the footage again. The driver did swerve toward it, but they could claim they swerved to avoid something in the road, lost control, whatever. Without proof of intent, it's usually treated as a minor traffic accident. She ran the plate anyway and came back to me looking troubled. The car is registered to Patricia Zimmerman. Does that name mean anything to you? Oh yes, I said. She's my former HOA president. We've had some recent disputes. Officer Santos raised her eyebrows. What kind of disputes? I gave her a brief overview of the fire hydrant situation and the hearing. She took detailed notes. This changes things, she said. If there's a pattern of harassment, we can pursue this more seriously. I'm going to have a conversation with Miss Zimmerman. In the meantime, I'd recommend installing some additional security cameras to cover your whole property. I'll do that. Officer Santos left and I called Marcus to update him. He was not happy. This is escalating, he said. Destroying your mailbox is a federal offense, technically, since it's interfering with mail delivery. But more importantly, it shows she's not backing down despite being removed from the HOA board. What do I do? Document everything. Install more cameras like the officer suggested, and if she does anything else, we pursue a restraining order. We might want to consider that anyway, to be honest. I spent the weekend installing additional cameras around my property and replacing my mailbox with a new, sturdier one. I also filed a formal complaint with the Ithaca Police Department about Patricia's harassment, including all the documentation from the HOA dispute. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking maybe Patricia had finally gotten the message. Then I came home one evening to find my car had been keyed. Long, deep scratches ran along both sides of my vehicle, gouging through the paint to the metal underneath. My car had been parked in my driveway all day while I worked from home, but I hadn't noticed anything unusual. I checked all my camera footage and found something disturbing. At around 2 in the morning the previous night, a figure dressed in dark clothing and wearing a hood had walked onto my property and keyed my car. The person had been careful to keep their face hidden, but I recognized the purple puffy coat. It was Patricia. I called the police immediately. Officer Santos came back, along with a detective named Michael Rodriguez. Mr. Zane, this is clearly criminal mischief, possibly criminal trespassing, Detective Rodriguez said as he reviewed the footage. And given the prior incidents and your documented history with Miss Zimmerman, we have enough for charges. Just like that, just like that. The video is clear enough to show someone deliberately vandalizing your property, and while we can't see the face, we can see distinctive clothing. Combined with the mailbox incident and the pattern of harassment, we have probable cause. They took copies of all my footage and documentation. Detective Rodriguez told me they would be contacting Patricia for questioning, and that I should expect to hear from them within a few days. 2 days later, Marcus called me with news. Patricia has been arrested. What? Already? Yes. Apparently, when the police went to question her, she lost her temper and confessed to both the mailbox and the car vandalism. She went on a rant about how you ruined her reputation and destroyed the HOA and how you deserved what you got. The detective said she basically confessed to everything without even being asked specific questions. You're kidding. I wish I was. She's been charged with criminal mischief in the third degree for the car, criminal tampering for the mailbox, and criminal trespass. The DA is also looking at possible stalking charges based on the pattern of behavior. I sat down heavily. This is insane. All of this over a fire hydrant that wasn't even on my property. People like Patricia can't handle being wrong, Marcus said. And they especially can't handle being publicly proven wrong. She probably convinced herself that you were the villain in this story and that she was justified in whatever she did. What happens now? Now it goes through the criminal justice system. Given that she confessed, there probably won't be a trial unless she changes her plea. She'll likely face fines, probation, and possibly some jail time depending on her prior record and how the judge feels about the stalking aspect. And the HOA. The HOA will probably want to distance themselves from her as much as possible. I'd expect a formal statement condemning her actions. They might even face some liability for her conduct while she was president, though that's less clear. The next week was a blur of police interviews, insurance claims for my car, and calls from curious neighbors. The story had spread through Meadowbrook Hills like wildfire. Patricia Zimmerman, the tyrannical HOA president, had been arrested for vandalizing a homeowner's property after being proven wrong about a property dispute. Richard Morrison, the interim HOA president, reached out to me personally to apologize and to assure me that the board was taking steps to review all HOA policies to prevent anything like this from happening again. He seemed genuinely mortified by the whole situation. We trusted Patricia to handle HOA business professionally, Richard said during our phone call. We should have been paying closer attention. The board failed you, Mr. Zane, and we're sorry. I appreciate that, I said. I just want to live in my house in peace. You will. And I promise you, we're going to make changes to ensure the HOA board has proper checks and balances. No one person should have had as much unilateral authority as Patricia gave herself. A month later, I received a restitution order from the court. Patricia had pled guilty to all charges and had been sentenced to 6 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution for the damages to my mailbox and car, plus court costs. The total came to about $4,500. She was also prohibited from having any contact with me or coming within 500 feet of my property. The HOA held a special election, and Richard Morrison was formally elected as the new president. One of his first acts was to pass a resolution requiring all property disputes to be reviewed by an independent third party before any fines could be issued. He also increased transparency around board decisions and made it easier for homeowners to challenge board actions. The fire hydrant remained clear throughout the rest of winter. Greenscape Solutions resumed maintaining it as part of their contract, and I never heard another word about it being my responsibility. I ran into David Brennan from Greenscape at a local coffee shop a few months later. He saw me and came over to my table. "Mr. Zane, I wanted to thank you," he said. "Thank me. For what?" "For standing up to Patricia. She'd been micromanaging and interfering with our contract for years. After what happened with you, the new HOA board reviewed all our contracts and removed the clause that allowed the president to unilaterally change service requirements. We can actually do our jobs properly now without someone constantly second-guessing us or telling us to skip things for petty reasons. "I'm glad something good came out of all this," I said. "More than you know. I've heard from other contractors in the neighborhood too. The pest control company, the pool maintenance people, everyone. Patricia had her fingers in everything, and she made everyone's jobs harder. The new board is actually pleasant to work with." As spring arrived and the last of the snow melted, life in Meadowbrook Hills returned to normal, or at least a better version of normal. The HOA became less intrusive, more responsive to actual homeowner needs, and significantly more reasonable in their enforcement of rules. I kept my security cameras up, just in case, but I never had another problem. Patricia's house went up for sale in April, and she moved away before summer. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had relocated to somewhere in Florida. I wished Florida luck. The whole experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, always know exactly where your property boundaries are and have the documentation to prove it. Second, never back down when you're right, even when it's easier to give in. And third, HOA boards have way too much power, and it only takes one person with a vendetta to make everyone's lives miserable. But it also taught me something more positive. Most people are reasonable when presented with facts. The other HOA board members had sided with me once they saw the evidence. My neighbors had supported me throughout the ordeal. David Brennan and his crew had even cleared the hydrant on their own time to help resolve the situation. For every Patricia Zimmerman in the world, there are dozens of decent people who just want to do the right thing. One evening in late May, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the warm weather when Richard Morrison walked by with his dog. He waved and came up my driveway. "Beautiful evening," he said. "It is," I agreed. "I wanted to let you know that we finalized the new HOA governance policies. They'll be going out to all homeowners next week. I think you'll be pleased with the changes. I look forward to reading them." Richard hesitated, then said, "I also wanted to apologize again personally. I was on the board when Patricia was harassing you, and I should have pushed back harder from the beginning. I knew she had a tendency to be overly aggressive, but I didn't realize how far she would go." "You made it right when it mattered," I said. "That counts for something. Still, I should have been more attentive. We all should have been. That's why we're implementing quarterly reviews of all fines and violations. 3 board members have to approve any fine over $100 now, and homeowners have an automatic right to challenge any violation before it becomes a formal fine. Those sound like good changes. They're necessary changes. What happened to you never should have happened, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." After Richard left, I sat on my porch for a while longer, watching the sun set behind the houses across the street. The fire hydrant at the corner of my property, the one that had started this whole mess, stood bright and yellow in the evening light, clear and accessible, exactly as it should be. I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. The harassment, the fines, the legal battle, the vandalism, Patricia's arrest. It had been stressful and exhausting, and there were times I wondered if I should have just cleared the stupid hydrant to avoid all the drama. But I knew that would have been wrong. It wasn't about the hydrant, not really. It was about the principle of not being bullied into taking responsibility for something that wasn't mine. It was about standing up to someone who abused their authority because they thought no one would challenge them. It was about establishing boundaries and defending them, even when it was difficult. The legal bills had been significant, though the restitution from Patricia covered about half of them. The time and stress had been considerable. But in the end, I had won, not just for myself but for every homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills who might have been Patricia's next target. I received one more piece of interesting news in June. Marcus called to tell me that several other homeowners had come forward with their own stories of harassment and improper fines from Patricia. The HOA board was reviewing all fines issued during Patricia's tenure as president, and they had already overturned more than 20 of them. "Turns out you weren't her only target," Marcus said. "You were just the first one to fight back effectively. How many people did she go after?" "At least 15 that we know of. Most of them paid the fines rather than deal with the hassle of fighting. One elderly couple paid over $2,000 in fines over 3 years for violations like having their garage door open during unapproved hours and parking their car facing the wrong direction in their own driveway. That's outrageous." "It is." The HOA is issuing refunds for all improper fines. It's going to cost them about $30,000, but it's the right thing to do, and they're using it as an opportunity to completely overhaul how they operate. I guess some good came out of all this after all. More than some. "You changed an entire neighborhood for the better, Coleman. You should be proud of that." After I hung up, I realized Marcus was right. What had started as a simple property dispute over a snow-covered fire hydrant had exposed years of abuse and led to real, meaningful reform. Patricia Zimmerman's vindictiveness had ultimately been her undoing, and the community was better for it. I went inside and poured myself a beer, then returned to the porch. My new mailbox stood straight and sturdy at the end of the driveway. My car, freshly repaired and detailed, sat gleaming in the garage. The fire hydrant remained visible and clear, maintained by the people whose job it actually was to maintain it. Everything was as it should be, and I had peace of mind knowing that I had stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it would have been easier to just give in. The fire hydrant that Patricia had tried to use as a weapon against me had instead become the catalyst for positive change throughout Meadowbrook Hills. As the summer progressed, the transformation in the neighborhood was remarkable. The HOA board meetings, which had previously been sparsely attended affairs, where Patricia essentially dictated policy, became well-attended discussions where homeowners felt comfortable voicing concerns and suggestions. Richard Morrison proved to be an excellent president, balancing the need for community standards with respect for individual property rights. The new policies implemented several key changes beyond the ones Richard had mentioned. All HOA correspondence now had to be approved by at least 2 board members before being sent. Any homeowner facing a fine received a warning first, along with clear information about how to remedy the violation or challenge it if they believed it was improper. The board also established an ombudsman position, a volunteer homeowner who could help mediate disputes before they escalated. I was asked to serve as the first ombudsman, which I found ironic but ultimately accepted. I figured my experience gave me unique insight into how things could go wrong and how to prevent it. Plus, I wanted to help make sure no one else went through what I had experienced. In my role as ombudsman, I helped resolve several disputes that could have turned nasty. There was the case of the homeowner whose garden gnomes were deemed excessive by one board member, the family whose children's chalk drawings on their own driveway were called a violation of aesthetic standards, and the man whose American flag was supposedly the wrong size according to someone's interpretation of the bylaws. In each case, I worked with the homeowners and the board to find reasonable solutions or, more often, to explain why the complaint was baseless and should be dismissed. It was satisfying work, and it kept me connected to the positive changes happening in the community. One day in August, I got a call from Officer Santos, the police officer who had first responded to my mailbox vandalism report. "Mr. Zane, I thought you'd want to know that Patricia Zimmerman violated her probation," she said. "What did she do?" "She sent you a letter. Her probation terms included no contact with you, direct or indirect. She mailed you a 10-page letter ranting about how you destroyed her life. It was intercepted by her probation officer during a compliance check. I never received any letter. You wouldn't have." Her probation officer goes through her mail as part of her monitoring. The letter was flagged, and now she's facing additional charges for violating the terms of her probation. What happens to her now? Probably jail time, at least a few months. The judge gave her a chance with probation, and she couldn't even follow the most basic term of not contacting you. Judges don't like it when people violate probation, especially this blatantly. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that Patricia was facing consequences for her continued obsession with me. Part of me felt sorry for her, trapped in her own anger and unable to let go. Mostly, I just felt tired. I wanted to be done with the whole situation. "Thanks for letting me know, Officer Santos." "No problem. And Mr. Zane, I've been a cop for 12 years and I've seen a lot of HOA disputes. Most people would have given up or moved away. You stood your ground and did everything right. The way you handled this is probably taught as a case study in how to deal with HOA harassment." "I just didn't want to be pushed around." "Well, you did more than that. You created real change. That's rare." After she hung up, I sat with her words for a while. I had created real change. The neighborhood was better. Homeowners had more protections and more voice in how things were run. Patricia was facing justice for her crimes. The fire hydrant was properly maintained. I never heard from Patricia again. According to later news reports, she served 4 months in jail for violating her probation, and after her release, she apparently moved to a different state. I hope she got whatever help she needed to deal with her issues, but I was mostly just relieved she was out of my life for good. The following winter brought more snow to Ithaca, and I watched with satisfaction as Greenscape Solutions diligently cleared the fire hydrant near my property along with all the others in the neighborhood. No one questioned whose responsibility it was. No one sent me threatening letters or fines. The system worked the way it was supposed to work. Richard Morrison served 2 full terms as HOA president before stepping down to focus on his career. His successor, a retired teacher named Grace Patterson, continued the policies of transparency and fairness that Richard had established. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA became known in Ithaca as one of the better-run community associations, a stark contrast to its reputation during Patricia's reign. I served as ombudsman for 3 years before passing the role to another homeowner. By then, the culture of the HOA had shifted so completely that the position was rarely needed. Most disputes were resolved quickly and reasonably, without escalation or drama. Looking back on the entire experience, I sometimes still can't believe how much chaos resulted from one woman's refusal to admit she was wrong about a simple property boundary issue. A fire hydrant in the snow, 3 feet beyond my property line, had been the spark that ignited months of harassment, vandalism, arrests, and ultimately meaningful reform. I learned that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation is crucial, that good legal representation is worth every penny, and that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. I learned that most people are reasonable when confronted with facts, and that the unreasonable ones eventually face consequences for their actions. But most importantly, I learned that community matters. The neighbors who supported me, the board members who eventually did the right thing, the contractors who helped document Patricia's interference, the police who took my complaint seriously, and the lawyer who fought for my rights all played a role in the positive outcome. No one does it alone, even when it feels like you're fighting a lonely battle. The fire hydrant still stands at the corner near my property, painted bright yellow, properly maintained and accessible. Every time I see it, I'm reminded of the principle I fought for, the battle I won, and the community that became better as a result. And I'm reminded that sometimes the smallest things matter the most, that property lines exist for a reason, and that you should never, ever let an HOA bully you into taking responsibility for something that isn't yours. Not even something as simple as clearing snow from a fire hydrant that happens to be close to your house, but not actually on your property. Because it's never really about the snow or the hydrant. It's about respect, boundaries, fairness, and the right of every homeowner to live in peace without being harassed by petty tyrants who abuse whatever small amount of authority they've been given. Patricia Zimmerman learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it too, but I came out on the right side of it. And Meadowbrook Hills became a better place for everyone because one person decided that enough was enough, and that the truth mattered more than avoiding conflict. The fire hydrant remains clear, the HOA remains fair, and I remain in my home, vindicated and at peace. And that's exactly how it should be.